rock and roll changed my musical direction early on.
Hello, and welcome to another new episode of Live Through That. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we dig a little deeper into the pivotal moments that shaped the lives of some of my favorite artists from the 80s and 90s. This week, we have musician Wille Nile on the show. Willie is a singer-songwriter who burst onto the scene with his acclaimed solo debut back in 1980. And while some legal hurdles in the industry temporarily slowed his solo path, they never came close to stopping him. Over the years, he shared stages with icons like The Who, Bruce Springsteen, and Ringo Starr. In today's episode, Willie takes us back to the moment that he first fell in love with rock and roll, and how discovering the raw energy of the Beat Poets helped shape his unique musical voice.
As far as pivotal moments in my life that changed the direction of where I was headed. When I took classical piano lessons as a kid, and it was a musical family. You know, my brothers played piano. My grandfather was an orchestra leader in vaudeville, and there was always music in the house, in the home we grew up in. So I took classical piano lessons, and I dug it, you know. And then I heard Fats Domino and great Jerry Lee Lewis and rock and roll, you know, hit. It was years ago. My older brothers brought records home from the store, but when I heard, and Little Richard, you know, Good Golly Miss Molly, sing that, like, oh, the piano can do that, you know, it can rock, it can move. And I loved it, you know, it just was so refreshing. I love classical music to this day, but there's something about the beat, you know, and that I loved. And that just really changed my focus musically. I would connect that when in high school, there was an English class I took. I think it was junior year. It could have been senior year. I think it was junior year. We had an English class, you know, 40, 45 kids, a bunch of wild idiots. And the teacher was really good. His name was Mr. DiChristina. And we were reading about Keats and Shelley, the poets, the English Romantic poets. You know, William Blake early on, and then Keats and Shelley, and then the Beat Poets. And I just really identified, that was really pivotal to me. Reading about the lives of Keats and Shelley and Lord Byron and Blake, something struck me. I went, well, wait a minute, I identified with so many things as we read about their lives in class, you know, and it just intrigued me, you know, like, oh, I do that. I stare at the sunlight coming in the windows and I watch the particles float and I do this, I do that. It just gave me a sense of direction, like, So I started writing, you know, poetry, you know, junior year of high school, stream of consciousness stuff. You know, I love the beats, Ginsberg, Corso, and Bob Kaufman. And with stream of consciousness writing, there's no right and wrong. You're just writing what comes to your head, you know, there's no judging it. It is what it is. And I found that very freeing, you know, and my mind was always going, is still always going 100 miles an hour. And that's why rock and roll caught my attention on the one hand. And on the other hand, you know, free verse, you know, identifying with these poets, these older romantic poets, and their passion for life and rock and roll's passion. And the beats, you know, stream of consciousness, you can write about anything. Bob Kaufman, you know, he wrote a poem called Blue O'Clock. I went, yeah, I could relate to that because it was interesting, you know, and Ginsberg, you know, America, why your library is filled with tears, you know. And then that was and obviously, you know, I was being influenced by music, you know, the British Invasion, Dylan, you know, from the Stones, the Kinks, the Who, all that stuff, the Beatles, obviously, and Dylan for sure. But it was those moments, like early on as playing classical piano as a kid, to being in high school, reading about the lives of these poets and really liking their poems. You know, Shelley's poem, Ode to the West Wind being truth, and the Beat Poets, that really changed me. You know, I started writing and thought of myself as maybe, well, I was writing, maybe I'm a writer, whatever. And then the third piece of that puzzle was when I In high school, I just goofed around. I just, I was smart enough. I didn't have to pay any. I didn't have to do any work. I could get by with, from the seat of my pants. And so I had pretty good, okay grades. I was partying, playing sports, playing with my friends, partying at night. So when I came kind of getting apply to college, my I had an 87 average in high school, something like that, which was, I didn't try. And when I wanted to go to college, and the colleges I applied to, I wasn't getting into. University of Buffalo, some local. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I was bound and determined I wanted to go to college. So I went and had a meeting with the guidance counselor in high school, and I said, "Yeah, I'm not getting any of these schools, and I want to go to college." And he said, "Well, there's a school in Canton, Ohio. They just built a new dorm, and they need students from out of state. So all these losers, all these wild animals, it was like Animal House. It was Animal House. All these crazy kids from wherever who couldn't get in for different reasons. It was a brand new dorm and had to fill the seats, fill the beds. And I remember being dropped off there. My mom, my older brother dropped me off. Dad was working. We drove, it was like 5 miles north of Canton, Ohio, Walsh College. And it was a Catholic college, whatever. But it was a college. I got in. And I remember when they dropped me off, this was in the middle of nowhere. There were no cows. It was just, there were cows, which is nothing. Farm country. The closest thing was 3 miles away was a Hoover factory, Hoover vacuum cleaner factory, 3 miles away. And I remember them driving off, looking at the car drive off, standing on the steps of this dormitory going, what have I done? Because I could see a long distance from the stairs. And I just thought, uh-oh, what did I just do? Because here I am in the middle of nowhere. A buddy of mine also was another wild man. And so I had a friend there. And but it turned out to be really pivotal. It's like, I think the lesson here is you just never know where the road's going to take you, number one. And what might seem like a huge mistake or an accident or whatever might be something really meaningful and pivotal. In my case, we were just partying, and I had 2 roommates, and one of them had a guitar. And there was nothing to do. And I said, hey, could you teach me to play the guitar? I was always writing poetry, just on my own writing, no right or wrong. I think I eventually wrote a couple of books, poetry. And I asked my roommate, could you teach me to play the guitar? Because I knew, piano. I knew classical piano, not great, and he was a right-handed guitar player. And I wrote with my right hand, but I did things both left and right. Playing pool, left-handed. And to play the guitar, I was a lefty. Chances are in first grade when they said, put the pencil in your right hand and do such, and I'm pretty ambidextrous. So I was a left-handed guitar player, but I couldn't be changing the strings every day. So I learned to play the guitar right-handed. And once I did that, and I just learned a couple of chords, I think I learned a Lovin' Spoonful song, Darling Be Home Soon. And actually when I met John Sebastian, Lovin' Spoonful, he's a sweet guy. I got to tell him that story. As I learned guitar, I learned to play with Darling Be Home Soon, You can have anybody watching this or listening, you can play, if you know 2 or 3 chords, you can play 1,000 songs. So all my writing, so I'm in the middle of nowhere, in north of Canton, Ohio, and there's nothing nearby except this small college, and music made a huge impact on my life. All kinds of music, from Tchaikovsky to Chuck Berry, the Ramones, whatever. I was a kid before the Ramones, so I learned to play the guitar, and so all my writing at that point, instead of just writing verse, I started putting songs together. And so all my writing from that point on, I just wrote songs, and so from classical piano, then hearing rock and roll like Little Richard, Good Golly Miss Mouse, seeing him play the piano on TV, seeing Jerry Lee Lewis on TV was a riot as a young, however I was a young kid, little boy. And in high school, being turned on to, English poets and then the beat poets. And then having a roommate that had a guitar. I mean, you would never guess. And it wasn't until years later that it dawned on me. Hey, wait a minute. That lost year, you know? Well, I mean, I got great grades, 3.5. It once, I could do the work. And I found college easier than high school. And so I went 2 semesters there in Walsh College. And I got 3.75 average. And I transferred to the University of Buffalo, night school, which is where I wanted to go. It's a great, great university. It was back then. And I went to night school. And I went from this conservative Catholic college where the night before final exams, where me and my buddies, we always would get in trouble because we were growing our hair or whatever. The night before final exams in whatever month, end of May or early June, at Walsh College, we got called down separately to the prefect of discipline. They were brothers, I forget. And I'm in the meeting with this guy, and he goes, "You can't take final exams unless you cut your hair." And I'm looking at him, and I went, "You're kidding me, right? This is a joke, right?" He goes, "No." And I go, "What are you? Come on, Because we had to cut. Man, my hair wasn't very long, but so I go, all right. So I cut it, but I transferred to the University of Buffalo, and at this point, I mean, I'm still a mediocre guitar player, but I can play and write songs. Same with the piano. So that you never would guess. I think the lesson here is you never would have guessed that this lost year at the university, at this college in Ohio, where we basically drank, partied, experimented with, whatever was going on at the time. We're talking 1966 to 67. And then I transferred to the University of Buffalo. So I went from this, buttoned down, dressed up, very restrictive environment to the University of Buffalo, which was absolutely amazing. Teachers smoking cigarettes. The conversations were so interesting. I'd walk through the student union, and I'd see Timothy Leary walking through the student union, staring at the walls, tripping his brains out. I'd see Allen Ginsberg. I saw him many times read, Abbie Hoffman, Gregory Corso, all the poets of the day. I would see them read, and it was a completely different environment, and I loved it. So for me, it was a total eye opener, and it happened because rock and roll changed my musical direction early on, and in high school, the poets changed, and then I learned to play the guitar in my first year of school. So you never know what you might learn along the road,
One of the very first 45s Willie ever bought was Buddy Holly's Peggy Sue, a record that left a lasting impression on him. Years later, that early inspiration would come full circle in a surprising way.
I took 2 quarters one day and went to Cabbage's record store, walked, a couple of blocks by myself, 10-year-old boy. It was a busy street, as I remember. It was a little dangerous. I was just a kid. Crossed the street, went into the store, and I went up to the guy and I go, "Hi, do you have a song called Peggy Sue by Buddy Holly?" And I bought it was 45, took it home, and I had this little plastic record player, a toy. And I played it 1,000 times, And the interesting thing about that is that would have been 1958, could have been 57. But in 2011, I went to South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. There's a big festival there every year, and 2,000 bands. And I was there with my band. And a friend of mine was a lawyer, one of the guys who was in the beginning of South by Southwest. We did a gig in the afternoon in some, bar. And after we did our performance, my friend comes up to me, Steven, and he said, "There's somebody here I want you to meet." And he said it in such a way I thought, oh, okay. It sounded interesting. And we walk around the corner, and he says that there's a small, a beautiful elderly lady. He says, "Willie, this is Maria Elena Holly." It was Buddy Holly's wife. And she had seen me play, and she wanted my autograph on my new album. And I went, whoa, 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 whoa. I want your autograph, and she was so sweet. But that's what I always say, there's something to be said for believing in your dreams and following them as best you can. It's not easy, there's obstacles for everybody, no matter what your path. You can have all the money in the world, you can have no money. Whatever it is, there's going to be obstacles. Well, I got to meet Buddy Holly's wife. I mean, I'm still, and we became friends. And to this day, Buddy, I would ask, we went to dinner, I asked her all these questions about Buddy. And long story short, there's the Buddy Holly Educational Foundation. When they lived in New York City, he lived a block from Washington Square Park, 2 blocks from where I live now and have for years. She said he would take the guitar at night to the park. He'd have his pajamas on, and he'd have a coat on, and he'd take it and play in the park. And kids would come up and ask him about the guitar, not knowing it was Buddy Holly. And so they decided they wanted to have a charity to help teenagers who wanted to learn music. And I'm an official ambassador, and that's because she was a fan. She liked me. The other official ambassadors are all who's who of the Hall of Fame, Mick and Keith, the Who, U2, Springsteen, Dylan, everybody, who doesn't love Buddy Holly? And anyway, I'm an official ambassador of Buddy Holly, and from buying that little 45 rock and roll 45 to 2011 meeting her, and then I think the next time I went was 2013. My band went to South by Southwest, and I played the official Buddy Holly party, and we sang, Rave On, and she sang with us. There's a little video clip somewhere of us, Buddy Holly's wife, singing Rave On with us in 2013. So, pretty crazy, huh?
It may not have been a life-changing moment, but by sheer luck, Willie ended up at the very first Woodstock Festival, completely by accident. And it became another surprising full-circle moment with a different rock icon.
True story. So I'm going to the University of Buffalo, and my brother was getting married in Newburgh, New York, which is maybe an hour or so from Woodstock. I never heard of Woodstock. And the word festival was not in the lexicon back in that year. That word didn't mean it. We're driving there. My brother Richard's friend John Gorman is driving, me and my girlfriend at the time, and we're driving, and we're on the highway, the throughway, and he's driving. We're driving this yellow Mercedes convertible. It was an old one. It was former Senator Moynihan's car. This guy John was dating his daughter, and he had his car. So we're driving on the throughway, top down, convertible. And he says, "Hey, there's this festival, some kind of, the Who are playing, and Jimi Hendrix." And I went, "The Who?" He says, "You want to go? It's Friday morning." And I went, "Let's go." So we made a left turn. Instead of going, we were going to go a day early to where the wedding was going to take place. And so we made a left. We went to Woodstock, Bethel Woods. And I remember we drove in. There was thousands. There were TPs. There was so many people. How we got there, I don't know. And people are all waving at us because we're in this yellow Mercedes Benz, or hair, long hair and everything. And we parked the car, and we started walking, and people are pointing us in the direction. And you'd walk through the woods. There were Christmas lights along the path to lead you. Follow the Christmas lights that were strung up in the tree. And we went. All of a sudden, we come to this big clearing. By then, it was a free festival. You could just walk in, and we walked right down square in the middle of it. There was so many thousands of people. This was Friday afternoon, probably 2 o'clock-ish. We walked right down in the middle. Maybe it could have been earlier, 11, 12, 1 o'clock. And so if you're looking, we're right in the center of the stage, maybe a couple of hundred people back. And the three of us sit down, we sit there, we stayed there for 24 hours, and watched the whole first day unfold. And you felt like there were helicopters. I saw Richie Havens do his magical performance, who became a friend of mine years later. He recorded a song of mine, On the Road to Calvary, years later. God bless Richie Havens. I signed the Family Stone. It was amazing. Tim Hardin, Joan Baez, Swami Satchidananda. It was a riot. People were passing wine, weed, whatever. It was like you had the feeling that, oh, the world's changing. It really was like, whoa, the world can change. And it was all about peace and love. So maybe it's going to change for the better. Well, it didn't last very long, did it? But we had a great time, and we left. Come Saturday late morning, we're walking out, and there's thousands coming. I saw a few friends. Hey, how we found our car, I'll never know. It must have been John Gorman must have found it, because I have no clue. We were stoned and whatever, having a ball, and we got to the wedding on time, and so I got to go to Woodstock, and full circle. In 2022, I got to open up for The Who. I opened up for The Who in 1980 when my first record came out across the U.S. And in 2022, I got to open up for The Who at Bethel Woods, at the original Woodstock. And they had not been there since '69, nor had I. And I got to open up the show. It was like, what is this, Zelig? Or what is this movie, You just never know.
Wille Nile just released his 21st record this past summer, The Great Yellow Light, and it's available now wherever you get your music. His newest single is also out, and it's called We Are, We Are. He has quite a few East Coast dates where he'll be playing some songs and sharing more stories like the ones that he shared with us today. Check them out if you're in the area. I'll have his website posted in the links so that you can find out more details on those. And as always, a quick reminder that you can buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel, Live Through That, on 90s artists, wherever you buy your books. And if you like this show, please leave a review where you're listening. It always helps others find us. And of course, subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. Thanks for listening.
This is Mark Shea from the Performance Anxiety Podcast on the Pantheon Podcast Network. We've teamed up with Teen Cancer America, the charity founded by Sir Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend of The Who, to bring you the most anticipated tribute album of the past 41 years. The Majesty of Rock is 35 of the best Spinal Tap cover songs you'll ever hear. You'll hear Spinal Tap songs done by Robert Hitchcock, Alan Johannes, members of Tool, Foo Fighters, Caius, Failure, Soul Asylum, and so many more. And every dollar raised goes to help teens and young adults diagnosed with cancer. This is a limited edition of 5,000 downloads, so go to teencanceramerica.org, check out the store, buy the album, and give teens and young adults the help they need.